Yeah,
Sorry.
okay.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Hi, and welcome to this week's segment of the agenda. Tonight we are talking about the bottom of the pyramid, population and poverty. And on tonight's panel we have
I'm Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft, and as well as Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations, more specifically the Water, Sanitation, and Hygiene.
I'm Kevin O'Leary. I'm the founder of SoftKey and as well as the O'Leary Financial Group. I'm a financial commentator and I believe that capitalism is the way of the future.
I'm Madonna and I'm a singer. I'm also a founder of a non-profit organization called Raising Malawi.
My name's Naomi Klein. I'm a Canadian and an anti-corporate activist, and I'm also an author and a journalist. I've worked for a whole bunch of different news outlets, and I've written 3 books, No Logo, Shock Doctrine, and This Changes Everything.
I'm Jim Yong Kim. I'm the 12th president of the World Bank Group, and I started with this position from July 1st, 2012, the chair of the Department of Global Health and Social Medicine at Harvard Medical School, and I was co-founder and executive director of Partners in Health before serving as this president.
Okay, welcome everyone. My first question is to you, Kevin. How much role do you think government should realistically play in developing countries?
I think there's a certain measure where government should not interfere, but in terms of a developing country, I believe that having a strong government that is on a democratic system that promotes an open economy, I think that's a very good way to stimulate growth. And as you've looked at all of the developed countries in the world, typically you see a more open economy with a democratic government that allows for businesses to operate freely.
Do you have anything to add?
I'm afraid I must jump in a little bit. I'm definitely so with you, Kevin, on the subject of a democratically elected government. And of course, we also all want the same thing here. We want a prosperous society. I am not necessarily a huge fan of a very open business environment because I find businesses not necessarily the best measure or best method of getting real social benefit. Economic growth for sure, it's designed to create economic growth and it doesn't, but I don't necessarily think that economic growth is the best way to help those who are actually poorest.
Okay. My next question is, how do you feel that the government regulations and population growth has affected resources for your organization?
Well, resources are always an issue, and since the population is always growing in these developing countries, these resources will always be limited. And with my organization, what we have brought to the table is a Reinvent the Toilet Challenge, which is an initiative that started in 2011, and that is a revolutionary toilet that does not need to be hooked up to a sewer or electricity. So, with that, we can help achieve universal access to sanitation by making toilets that people like and can afford to use them for 5 cents per user per day.
That's great.
Oh, I thought you wanted to say something, I'm sorry.
I was happy.
But my next question is for you. So you say that the main issue for the depletion of resources is government regulations and how they're allowing these businesses to kind of take advantage of those resources. In that case, do you feel that population growth has anything to do with the depletion? Do you have any solutions for that?
It's like sort of intuitive that population growth has an impact on resource depletion.
But I'm sorry, what I'm asking is it fair to just blame businesses then? If it's
I'd say
providing a
that
service?
it is overwhelmingly the fault of businesses because what you see, if that was really the case, if population was really the determining factor, Canada's environmental impact would be quite small compared to, say, Bangladesh, which has 20 million more people than us. But as you can see, that's like clearly ridiculous. We have a exponentially larger impact because of the relative levels of affluence, and not just because of that, because of how we as a society have decided to use that wealth. So businesses which create demand for products, as I mentioned in my book, No Logo, they brand and they market and they are existing to create a sense of malaise and to make us spend our money on their products. So that is one of the chief drivers of this resource depletion, because as people are doing that more and more, then that's what's really causing the change, the depletion of resources, rather than the number of people.
I'd have to disagree with that one. And, businesses do not force people to buy anything. People want these products. Businesses are simply the people that provide them. I think that scapegoating a business as the reason why resources are depleting is not necessary, as the reason these resources keep depleting is because people still want them. I think businesses are here to solely fill the need, and if there was no need, then it's physically impossible for these businesses to exist because there would be no product to sell.
Why, sorry, if that's true, but, I mean, if that's true, then why is there any marketing, ever? Because if people only buy what they actually need, then they don't need to be convinced to buy anything.
But people are not aware of products if you don't market. If you just
Right, but
create
if
a
you
product and don't tell people about it, people won't necessarily want it.
That's definitely true, and that was sort of the original purpose of marketing, but now that we have like intense branding, that kind of purpose has changed. And also, if people really needed the product, then they would probably go find it on their own. You wouldn't have to literally barrage people.
But in terms of needs, all we need is water and food.
And shelter, and a reasonably clean and healthy place to live.
But people
And
want more than that.
education. These are needs. I mean, people want,
And businesses provide these for people.
they can. I would not necessarily argue that they're the only entity that exists in society that could do so.
I would ask for one example of a person who buys a house that a business has not affected.
Sorry?
I'd ask for one example of shelter being provided where a business has not affected it.
Okay, well, how about the temporary shelters that exist everywhere in the wake of a disaster? Because businesses, despite the intense need that people have for these shelters, they don't have enough of an economic incentive. They don't have enough economic power to get the businesses to do that. So you have to have other people to
And
create
the
it.
money that comes to these charities, a lot of it comes from businesses.
I mean, or governments or like intergovernmental organizations. Sure, businesses have a lot of money right now in the world economy. That's sort of how it works, but it doesn't necessarily
money-
have to.
All it comes down to is businesses generate the money that stimulates the economy, that allows people to give money to this, businesses give money to this. And without business, there's no money to create the shelters when people do need them.
I mean, that is an assumption.
I mean, this does lead to my next question for you, which is if you don't think we need the businesses to provide those funds or resources to help those who need them, what's your solution on where to get those funds?
I mean, I just want to say that I'm not saying that no business can ever exist. I'm saying that a lot of the large corporations that do exist have grown beyond what is socially required from those businesses. Personally, I'm in favor of many resources being provided on a social and communal basis. For instance, energy. I strongly advocate for small social ownership of energy production means. So like a neighborhood-wide biodigester to create natural gas to create energy. For instance, that's just one of the projects that I've supported in the past, rather than having a large corporate entity providing these things.
And it's projects like those, like the off-the-grid affordable toilets, where we will recover these valuable resources. So, for example, these toilets, from our feces, we can achieve 100% of waste processing at $0 cost, which is something that we really should be looking for in these developing countries.
I'm glad that you mentioned that because as somebody who is trying to solve a resource issue, do you feel like you would be able to if you didn't have the funds from your existing businesses?
Well, I'm involved in a lot of businesses and I've created a lot of capital through that, so to be honest, I don't really think that I would have been able to do this with the money I've created through my businesses in the past.
So that's kind of where I was headed with that, and I mean, it's a little bit of a theme. So you as a celebrity have a lot of excess funds. Do you feel that you would have ever started an organization like this if you didn't have all this extra money that was kind of lying around?
If I don't have like that much of money, I won't like.
I mean, Madonna, I mean, you'd have to admit, has a huge network, which means you have a lot of money to spend. So if you weren't who you are, if you weren't making that much money and that much kind of extra profit, would you have been able to start the organization that you've started and done the things you've done without the money to kind of start it out?
No, I don't think because because money is kind of really important thing.
Yeah.
And like for charity work especially, like if we don't have those money, I don't think we can start like an organization like this and help the poverty and the poor.
Agreements, disagreements?
I can't, I'm sorry, I can't fully agree with what you're saying. I mean, for sure, obviously, it was very helpful to you to have that money, but I would argue the real value of, sorry, what's the name of the organization? I'm forgetting, Malawi.
Raising Malawi.
Raising Malawi. I'd say one of the big things that it is able to do is raise awareness because of your celebrity profile. I mean, there are many people who are wealthier than you. We have one sitting at the table today. So I'd say the unique opportunity that you have to create change is through your social capital rather than your financial capital. And I also would say that with regards to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, I have to bring this up at this point. You certainly have created a lot of wealth through your businesses, and you have also created wealth in that organization through investments. But many of your investment practices, I'm actually engaging in a campaign right now to try and convince you to change them, because I feel that you've invested about 12% of your total funds in the 200 largest fossil fuel companies in the world. I would definitely argue that those companies have created a massive problem of poverty in the developing world and massive shortages of fresh water as a result of climate change. So you, who draw 4% of the money to give to these great social projects each year, but create 12% of your money through investments in highly questionable organizations, how do you think that you're really doing good?
Well, I find that along with those inquiries that you made, I'm also adding to the developed countries through Microsoft. But I have many different organizations that give back to developing countries, so I'm not sure exactly where you got those stats, and I don't believe that, because
Really?
The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation actually just gives to many different organizations across the world.
You do.
We're in many different countries all over the world, and
That's definitely true. I mean, you
I'd
have
also
a lot
like
of money.
I'd also like to chime in. It's proven that in developed countries, poverty rates are much lower. It's undisputable. In terms of energy, it goes back throughout history that in terms of discovery of oil has led to profits developed countries. Oh, you can trace back their history to the findings of oil. Energy companies, the emissions levels that they measure in the air are actually higher centuries ago, around dinosaur times, prehistoric ages. The emissions level were higher back then they are now when we have these energy companies around now.
All of that is true, but these are only in absolute terms. So yes, technically you had closer to 800 parts per million in the early Permian period of carbon dioxide or carbon dioxide equivalents in the atmosphere. That's certainly true. Nobody's going to deny it, and we have about, 385 right now parts per million? So it's much lower. That's true. But the difference is that 200 years ago we were at 250, which means that the change in the atmosphere has been at a faster rate than, and I'm not exaggerating here, literally any other point in history.
This is true. There is an environmental impact,
Yes.
but I think in terms of overstating a case, we're blowing up something that has been historically worse off before. I'm not saying this is a good thing. I'm not saying we don't need to change things, but I'm saying that we can't scapegoat people that are, since all they're doing is filling the need for other people.
But also, like when it comes to the issues of security from the natural disasters, people living in the developed countries like USA and Australia, they are more secure than developing countries like China and Africa, India. So I think it's really like they need to spend more money in the developing countries.
So, kind of touch on both of your points right here. I think it's safe to say that you agree that without kind of the consumer mindset that we have, we would have never become the developed country that we are. So then what I'm trying to say is, do you think it's possible for a developing country to get the help that they need without the developed country's help?
I think that in this current world, if a developing country is going to survive the next 100 years, they need the help of developed countries. But I don't think that we can say that the way that developed countries have done things is a good way. or or absolutely the way that developing countries should do it. Sure, we have a consumer mindset in the developed countries, but we were also imperialists. Part of the reason we're so wealthy is because we literally stole the wealth from everywhere else in the world. And in those countries that are developing rapidly, like India, China, Brazil, Russia, and South Africa, what you see is this same process repeating at a smaller scale. So in India, they have extreme wealth in certain areas, and at the same time, they're actually taking wealth from the poor areas. So simultaneously, the poor are becoming more vulnerable to many of the worst environmental impacts, that the rich are becoming more protected. So I think for us to say, okay, we should continue to embrace this consumer mindset and expand it as a way to reduce poverty is very counterintuitive. There will always be poor, and if you want to think about it in terms of numbers, since poor people reproduce more quickly than rich people on average, there will always be increasing problems of poverty throughout the world. I think the best campaigns that we have are the ones that sometimes the World Bank and more often governments and NGOs do, where they actually focus on reducing levels of poverty in these areas by socially providing the things that these communities need, rather than coming in and saying, oh, the economic model will solve it.
Well, I find that we need to do better at educating those developing countries, as we have done and continue to do very well in developed countries. For instance, I find that they definitely do not know that there are over 700,000 infant deaths from poor sanitation annually, and 40% of the world engages in open defecation. They don't know that they should be going to a toilet where it's healthy, where they won't get diseases and potentially die.
Yeah, I think education is extremely important because take Malawi as an example, and Malawi is one of the poorest countries in the world, and there is only 12% of women complete secondary education, and nearly half of the women are illiterate. And then look at the population problems around the world in undeveloped countries and developing countries. If women have educated not only about using waters and stuff, but also it could help those countries to control their population too. And this is the right of every woman to be educated, and I think literacy is a life-changing for them, and that will transform the future of the children across Malawi or other countries, and it will change their future of their nation too.
Well, I want to add on to both of your thoughts. Education plays an important role in this section. Like where developing countries, women are not provided as many chances as compared to men, and this creates differences between them, resulting in gender inequality and discrimination. So education is one of the surest way of ending extreme poverty, and yet today, like 121 million children remain out of primary and lower secondary school, and 250 million have not learned. Sorry, can we just read it? Have not learned to read or write. Reaching these children requires evidence. Can we just read this?
Yeah, we do. They do need evidence. They do need that information. I agree with you.
Which is the best solution? The World Bank total education investment is like more than 14 billion, which will help these children to educate.
Okay, so my last question is a little bit off topic from everything that we've been talking about, but it's something that has to do with you, and do you think that that poverty or lack of food can be solved without using genetically modified foods?
I think that if there was a way that would be successful, it would have seen some results by now. I think that GM foods are definitely not going to save the world as they are right now, but I think in terms of a solution that would be widely acceptable, widely beneficial to everybody, it's a way that if you found a way to grow crops anywhere that are completely healthy, that is a solution that to me just it works for everybody, it keeps everybody healthy, and to me it offers the biggest win-win of any sort of solution out there.
I have to interject here. I mean, I don't know a whole lot about GM foods, but if they can be safe, that's great. I don't know, can't weigh in on this, but one thing that I would say that is another solution that we should probably embrace, at least at the same time, if not necessarily instead of GM foods, is waste, food waste. Because right now, literally 50% of food that comes out of the ground is thrown away without being eaten. It's ridiculous. Like, it's really ridiculous. So if we had really good local food, I'd say that's one big thing, because then you don't have food wasted in transport. If we had, so that's part of my idea behind like locally controlled resources. Something I'd like to see.
And also, I think teaching people how to use the resources that they have, or maybe reproduce something valuable or materials to satisfy their basic needs, I think it will be also a good way to like solve the problems.
Okay, so I'm glad that you said that, because I want to know, for countries that don't have the resources to necessarily grow their own food locally, would GM foods not be a solution?
I mean, like I said, if GM foods can really work, if they work really well, if they are cheap enough, if they don't invade the local ecosystems, if we don't have, conflicts over property rights, which we've had before, and if they're healthy, then why can they not be a solution? I don't know that any necessarily of those criteria have yet been met. If in the future we can get there, that's great. But I think also that honestly, I can't think of any place on earth where it is literally impossible to grow food. Often the way, it might be that because of changing patterns of weather through climate change, there will be countries which will be unable to grow their own food. And in that situation, honestly, I think rather than transporting the food to those countries, we're gonna see whether it should be or should not be, is we're gonna see massive migrations, because people don't want to live somewhere where they can't get food or water. So I don't know, I don't think that there's any country where it is impossible to grow your own food.
Not necessarily impossible, but just not economical.
I think there's something wrong with any economic system that says you shouldn't be able to feed yourself.
I think that in terms of some climates, a lot of things that grow need water, and not all climates receive water or
That's
have
true.
the nutrients in the ground necessary. So there are a lot of places in the world that food is unable to grow. It's very factually true that
That's true.
deserts, places with very little rainfall, food is unable to grow there, and that's why you see the problems. It's not necessarily an economical problem, it's a climate problem, it's a soil problem, it's, there's multiple problems.
Yeah,
That's
there's
why.
also, they don't have seeds to help them grow too. They
So-
don't have the resources.
I think seeds are sort of a different question, because seeds are a commodity that companies sell and maybe governments could buy and give to their people. Like there's any number of ways to deal with the problem of commodity. With regards to deserts, I mean, obviously you can't grow crops in a desert unless you're the U.S. and you're silly and you irrigate your deserts. But that's a whole different question. Generally, no. However, those communities that have adapted to live in arid regions tend to have adapted to this also. So like you hear of groups who are cattle herders, the cattle are able to eat things that humans aren't, so then the humans eat the cattle and therefore are able to survive on cattle. Stuff like that, these are adaptations that humans have already made. So I think that if the world were to remain the same, people should be able to find food in the local community, and if something like lack of seeds has happened, that's an economic problem. But climate change is happening, there will be climate refugees, there will be people who don't have enough food, and that's a problem that we need to fix in the future.
Okay. Tonight's discussion was great, very interesting. That's it for today's segment.
Thanks.
Thank you for watching.